Happy Juneteenth, American listeners, from our Tough Call team. We hope you have a great holiday. A message from mediators who have wanted to offer their services. We're going to promote some of the ones that we know. We understand that they are all about helping your workplace or organization get one step closer to promoting equity, diversity, and inclusion. Don't forget to like, rate, and subscribe, and enjoy the show. Tough Call Mediation is brought to you by Herb Legal LLP, serving your mediation and freelance paralegal needs in Ontario, New York, Quebec, and throughout North America. Connect to their website today at www.herblawservices.com.
Hello, and welcome to Tough Call, a mediation podcast. My name is C.T. Ayler, and I am with my co-host, Mr. Dale Sheldon, not the Reverend today, haha. We're also with my friend, Dr. Shailla Vaidya. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm very excited to talk to you. I'm so excited that you agreed to this because we met at a conference I helped organize for yoga many moons ago, pre-COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And
Pre-COVID, yeah.
I attended your workshop. Do you remember what it was?
The stress that I talk about all the time, the nervous system and how the nervous system can get thrown off, and all the things that affect illness and our well-being. So, yeah.
And that's a big reason why I thought it would be great to introduce you to the audience and bring you on, because legal issues are stressful. No way around it. It is probably one of the worst times in your life that you're calling legal services, be it a lawyer, a paralegal, whatever. And then choosing private mediation has been marketed as this way out to bypass the court system, but that doesn't make it any less stressful. Like, we're talking about families dividing or elder care when they're making decisions on capacity. And because you have such a strong medical yoga meditation background as well, I mean, you know stress. You are a resident stress expert. You even have a workshop on yoga for burnout, which I think everyone needs to take. And I just kind of wanted you to tell a little bit about why you decided to learn and talk to people about stress. What is it that's valuable to you?
Yeah, it's at the root of so many illnesses. And I saw that when I was practicing family medicine and in Emerge. So I started off, I studied medicine. I did a family medicine residency, an emergency medicine residency, and then I went into the community to practice. So I practiced as an Emerge doc in the inner city. We could see a lot of stress-related illnesses. I worked in the suburbs as a family doctor. I saw how stress, like jobs, people's day-to-day jobs, the responsibilities they had with their families, the speed of our life right now, the changes in our diet, everything really contributed to their health. And I also had the privilege of working in Indigenous communities where I saw what happens when we rip culture away, when we demonize culture. And I mean, it's terrible what the government, what the country, in the United States, in Canada, was done throughout Turtle Island, what happened to the traditional knowledge of Indigenous people, and to see how that affected their stress levels, affected the trauma they experienced, and affect how their bodies are now, that intergenerational trauma. And it was interesting because working up there, I realized that, the white man's medicine that I was bringing up was really not what they needed. They needed to get back to their traditional ways. And when I came back and was working in Mississauga, which is a city outside of Toronto, and it has a large immigrant population, I could see the same illnesses taking root with the loss of cultural practices. So diabetes, heart disease, lots of things, metabolic syndrome, which will then develop into diabetes. And the root of stress at the basis of that a nervous system that is stressed, that is not allowed to discharge stress, that's not allowed to come back into a restful state and in community with others, how that affects our nervous system and how that affects our health and our hormones, et cetera. So that's really where it started. And of course, when I went into the Indigenous community, saw the ripping away of culture and coming back to work with immigrants and seeing, well, they're no longer practicing cultural things that were true to their culture as well. Of course, there's a lot of South Asians. So I just brought in yoga, breathing techniques, movements, meditation, all these components that came into it that really seemed to help in a way that medications weren't. And that just carried on as I continued my medical practice. I learned more about adverse childhood experiences, so stressful events that happen to us in our childhood, how that can affect the nervous system as it's primed. And I realized all the people I was teaching yoga to were the people who had high childhood adversity.
Right.
And yeah, people can measure that score. That's called the ACE score, adverse childhood experiences. And the link, if you want to take a look at the studies, because it came out of an obesity clinic in San Diego with Dr. Vincent Folletti. And the website is ACEs Too High for anyone who wants to look into that. Now, of course, looking into things like that can be traumatizing. So you do want to be prepared. There's a lot
Just
of
take a moment.
There's a lot of, it's the first 5 minutes of the podcast and here I am. But I just want to say that was important information, right? And that's where I really, was like, wow, I really see the value in these teachings that really came from my yoga teachings anyway, that as it's taught now came from India and my ancestors who were also colonized and who were jailed as political prisoners to preserve this stuff because the British, again, in India were trying to demonize the cultural practices there. And so they were jailed because they were practicing these things. And it was very important to them that these things remained alive, that we didn't forget our cultural teachings. And so even when I went into medicine to begin with, I wanted to bring that knowledge forward. And, lo and behold, as my career evolved, because we had to study medicine and practice it, I was able to kind of incorporate all of those things back into my practice. And we have so much research now that actually shows how beneficial these practices are. So I consider myself really, really, really lucky to be able to do both and to bring them in and to make links to this time when I met you at a yoga conference and yet what I do in my day-to-day life as a physician and what my patients go through. So you're talking about legal matters. And, I'm so glad you brought up, care of the elderly when we have to bring in legal matters to that. I don't think we learn enough in school about how often the legal system is going to come in or be involved in the decisions that we make when we buy a house, when we, going through a divorce. This is another place mediation is so great. And, for me recently, I had a head injury. So shortly after I met you in 2018 at this yoga conference at Accessible Yoga, about a month later, I had a brain injury from a bicycle accident. And then I had to go into the whole process around disability and insurance. And had that been from a car accident, it would have been
fine.
Involved
like just more. So easy. Boom, boom. Yeah. But I know. I know.
It becomes even worse, right? And my personal experience is the stress that people endure going through these processes, going through the legal processes, contributes to them not being well.
Yes.
Right? It contributes to prolongation of symptoms and so many other things simply because it's just so stressful. So when you emailed me about this and we talked, we were like, yeah, we could, there's a lot here that we can chat about and review. So
100%. And because, and I think you talking about it and being so open about it, even on social media, is very valuable and important because, having been a healthcare practitioner, having been an educator, I came from experiences where, at first when I was a teacher, I was a non-parent for so long. So I used to be so judgmental of parents until I had my own kid. And I was like, whoa, so harsh.
It's a whole other thing.
And then before I became a medical practitioner through clinical massage, I had these ideas and expectations and beliefs. And then, but I got into the medical healthcare because I had a broken spine and issues myself. So it informed my practice more, that experience, that ability to connect more. It's like, oh, I know exactly what you're going through. And then what led me into legal practice and changing my career again was because I had some legal experience and background and issues. And then it made me go, you know what? I can't do clinical massage therapy forever. Like, my body's breaking. I'm getting a little bit older. I need to transition somehow. As much as I love doing this, I need to do something that will also, and I would see people in my therapeutic practice and noticing incapacity issues. I dealt with a lot of people with concussion symptoms who'd been sort of relegated to the massage therapy world and sort of patient dumped. I know that's sort of an internal jargon, but it's more, oh, wow, we don't know what to do with you. And even 10 years ago, we don't have the same level of education around concussion and how much cognitive impairment that can give and how so many symptoms can look like someone who is maybe aging and developing dementia or whatnot, and how scary and stressful and additionally traumatizing it could be. And I wonder if you'd tell us, what is it like to navigate daily life when you have some cognitive impairment? Like, what's that like?
This is such a great question. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to it, because even as a medical practitioner, I saw concussion from the outside. And I also had a few concussions, but then I got better. So the temporary changes of inability to put thoughts together or speak, or even the headaches, the focus for the past concussions I had in the previous time, like they seemed to get better within 3 to 6 weeks. And I went on and I didn't realize how debilitating it was. But when I got, when I had this head injury, it was a bike accident. I had a helmet on, but, and that probably saved my life. But I still, not my first concussion. I was a woman with concussion. We know so much more. We've learned so much more in the past 5 or 6 years. So you're right. 10 years ago, we didn't have this knowledge that, wow, what's going on in the brain? We didn't even have the technology. But I can tell you, when I hit my head, I was like, initially, I was in a state of shock. And I was like, I'm okay. This is fine. Get up, pick myself up, get back on my bike. And it wasn't until a few days later, like I went back to work and I was like, wow, I can't, people are talking to me, but I'm not processing, like something's not right here. And I was even telling my colleagues and they were like, you look okay, called my family doctor. And even at that time,
I love that you just said that. So you're fine. Shake it off. Walk it off.
Well, we're all so busy. The problem is we're all so busy. They actually apologized because they were like, you were kind of walking around, but we were so busy. I didn't even take the time to talk to you and see what was going on, because people who were coming in were they were also sick.
For sure.
And I was like,
and they're human too. Yeah.
I know. I think I just need a tetanus shot. I'll call the family doctor. And truthfully, my family doctor, what they would have done was just noted all my symptoms, but they probably wouldn't have been able to do too much. Like, sadly, this is the thing. We have to see how things evolve. But I'll tell you, I had a really hard time navigating the healthcare system. And I'm a doctor. Like, I know the healthcare system. I know who to call, who to, what strings to pull. I had a really difficult time trying to get help. And I ended up having to, I was on vacation right after I hit my head. I was on vacation. So I wasn't that bad initially. Like, it seemed to get worse with time, which we now know is neuroinflammation that over time. So initially the concussion will happen. There's these diffuse shearing forces that seem to tear apart the connections between neurons and even damage neurons. Those are some of our brain cells. And then we have the glial cells in our brain. They're like the women. They do everything. They feed the neurons. They clean up after them. They repair them. So they try to do their thing. But then eventually, if they can't do it all, they may actually get stuck in inflammation mode because they've been prolonged. And anyone who's had the flu, would notice what neural inflammation is like. That's like when you're sick. And for a couple of days, you're in this fog. And then as you get better, it clears up. And it's like, it's night and day. You almost don't realize how bad you were until you're better. And then you kind of look back and go, oh, wow, my head was foggy. Yeah. People who've had mono, same thing. They're sick for like 6 weeks, but then they get better. So it looks like those glial cells are getting stuck in inflammation. And so you get this neuroinflammatory state, which seems to be the cause for brain fog. And of course, past 5 years, we've learned so much in concussion. Then we had COVID come in, another huge neuroinflammatory response. So we're learning so much more about how the brain operates and acts. So this is happening in the background. And then for me as a patient, I'm trying to navigate what is it that I need, because I couldn't even explain to people what it was I needed. I didn't have that capacity. I just know things aren't right. And this is where my yoga training really came in. I'm so glad I was a mindfulness practitioner, a yoga practitioner, because I could see, like I could be in that self energy where I could see my mind. You know, I'm a little bit separate from it when you're not hijacked into it. But when you can separate from it, I was conscious that my brain wasn't working the way it was, but I couldn't express that because the expression of it comes through the working of the brain, right? The ability of the communications center to work with our speech center. Like the brain does so many things. And until it doesn't work, it's like, wow, I didn't realize that those were different things that my brain connected to, right? But, right?
Who
like
is
I thought that was just one thing.
that is there? Who is that witness that is just kind of standing or being somewhere around us vaguely? Yeah.
Like I have a thought in my head that I can't project out in speech because the thought center where I'm forming what I want to say and the speech center where I'm saying what I want to say are two different centers in the brain. And the highways that are working between them are damaged, so the message can't get there. And so that was an incredibly frustrating experience for me. And, you know, I tried to talk to my doctor. Also, I had a lot of pain. So she was trying to navigate all of this stuff. I was seeing somebody who was a specialist who wasn't giving me the best advice. So that was upsetting. And what I'll tell you, I was lucky being in the healthcare professions because I had a friend who was a physio, other doctors who were like, you can't see my patients anymore. I got to get you help. Yeah. Go see this clinic, go see that clinic, talk to this person, you know, and it was really hard to get appointments. And it was to the point my headaches got so bad, which is one symptom of the concussion, that, and I couldn't go back to work, that some of my own patients were calling my neurologist, because we had the same neurologist, and saying, I will give up my appointment if you could see Dr. Vaidya, because she needs to be seen and get help, because if she's not getting better, I can't get better. I mean, that's terrible. That should not be happening. But it was so hard. And I remember calling the admin assistant for my own doctor, and she was like, oh my God, your patients are driving us nuts. But they're your patients too. I'm like, yeah, we know, we got to get you in otherwise. And once the neurologist found out what was happening, she's like, oh yeah, get her in, because if she's not good, then all these other patients that are mine are not going to get treatment. So not that I had jumped through many queues, but at least I had that. Yeah. And I had people who had gone through this say, go talk to this doctor, go try that. Early exercise, something we didn't talk about, because before it was concussion, go sit in a dark room, right?
Yes, don't do anything. Such bad advice in some ways.
It's bad advice. Now, I mean, in some ways, some people need it. Like, I know I was only comfortable in my dark room for a little bit, but I did try to get up and do laundry. I did try to do some things. So as tolerated is most important, but totally shutting down is not, you know, we may need the crutch, like earplugs, or I used walking sticks to help me get my balance back, but then eventually we don't need those things anymore. So a lot has changed in concussion management, and that's wonderful, but it's still frustrating for the person who's experiencing it. And we're talking about mediation and insurance. And I have so many patients who, you know, like, it's overwhelming to get those letters from insurance. Like, I had insurance policies that I couldn't, my brain at the time couldn't read numbers. So one of the things my insurance policy wanted me to do was to get the last 3 years of my income, my taxes, and then like my monthly statements. I still to this day don't know how I found them, or where, I don't know where they are now, but somehow I found them in a file folder and I brought them out. The insurance company sent somebody to my house to help me. He's like, pick the best 2 years of your salary. And I was like looking at
these are hieroglyphics. I don't know.
100%. I could not read. I couldn't fill out forms. Like it was, and I was getting so stressed about it because, we know in our brain, we have our limbic system, our amygdala, our little smoke detector that goes off for stress. Well, that thing was going off all the time because if I was walking down the street and I was wearing my Birkenstocks, the flip of the flop of the Birkenstock was causing me so much distress. The sound, the balance was throwing my head off, that my amygdala was going off, my heart rate would go up, blood pressure, breathing rate. I was getting stressed. So it's like, okay, I've got to change my shoes. That's one thing.
And that's just walking down the street. You're not juggling.
Don't even talk to me about You're not walking into a grocery store, which is another huge thing with the lights and the people and the amount of stuff. So there was a lot of cognitive executive function I couldn't do, and my stress response was going off. And of course, it was going off all the time. And because stress can trigger inflammation, I was getting more inflammation from that. So concussion recovery, it's this balance. You want to challenge, but you don't want to stress, right? Because stress can make everything worse. But you don't want to do nothing, because then doing nothing can make everything worse, because the brain isn't getting the oxygen. It's not getting the challenge it needs to heal itself. So it's this little Goldilocks principle of just right? And to kind of widen our activity. But that's what makes the legal process so hard, because all of a sudden there's been like 60 or 90 days. Some people have policies, some people don't, but there's a time frame where you have to put into insurance, or you have to speak with a lawyer.
Deadlines, and court dates.
Yeah. And you're just trying to get better. And the other thing is the fatigue. Because the brain isn't working so well, it's requiring a lot more energy to do even the little things that it's trying to do. So then coming back to the legal aspect, it's complex, right? Legalese, none of us can read it. That's why people need to go into professions, right? To, like you did, paralegal, lawyers, law clerks. They're all trained in how to read and write these sentences that don't really make that much sense in English. And for us that are going through this process, it's like, what did they say? Am I agreeing to something? Like, for my, as I was going back to work, my disability insurance said, oh, so now you're on residual. And I was like, that sounds like it's a legal term. I think I need to look into that before I agree to anything you've just said to me in terms of what my capacity is. So it was a huge learning curve for me in understanding the biology of brain injury, which again, we're only really understanding over this past 5 to 10 years. And because of technology, like in science, we like to see something. So you can't see the damage of a concussion on a CT scan.
It's like asking a group full of doctors to do an interpretive dance of something. It's like they're not going to know how to articulate that.
Right. You can't see it. And also the CT scan may give you radiation that is also not good for the brain. So we have rules. It's been studied 20 years ago. It's been validated that, people with these symptoms should get a CT scan. People with these symptoms, it's not that you don't have symptoms. It's just that we're not going to see it on the CT scan. And I think a lot of people get really upset that they didn't get the CT scan when we know it's an X-ray. It's really not going to show us anything.
But there's some other
And even an MRI is not necessarily going to show us anything. What we're seeing with brain injury in the research, it's like these really high level MRIs with dyes that we inject to see different cells working. And at this point, we're 2024, we don't have that capacity in our healthcare system, the United States or Canada or wherever in the world. We probably don't have that. There are other scans that people can do, but they're very specialized. You have to know what you're looking for in order to set the machine to look for it.
So a lot of people, I'm guessing, it's more after it's all happened and the damage has been done to a certain extent.
Yeah. And it's the symptoms that you live with. But because here's the other thing with brain injury, it's a real shakeup of the brain, and it disconnects lots of little neural circuits. And because of that, every brain injury seems to be different. What I experienced with my injury may be different than the next person I see because of the way our brains shook up and because of where those damaged highways are. It's not always the same pattern. And that makes it very difficult for brain injury survivors to actually prove that, how do I say this? Like, their symptoms may be unique. And when you're working in a legal system with insurance or with mediators, or sorry, not mediators, but with lawyers, they're
both,
trying to check
really, because
off,
sometimes
right?
mediation can come in with the insurance company, and
100%.
it's amazing when that happens. It's grown more in the States than in Canada, and I wish mediation in healthcare and insurance was a little bit more prevalent, because where you're going, and I think you and I are definitely trying to not paint insurance as the big bad guy, because really we need insurance, right?
We do,
I mean, I had just fun little side note. Years and years and years ago, I went to Cambodia, and I realized as I was going on that trip, my healthcare insurance had just run out. And I traveled enough that I was like, oh, well, what's the worst that can happen? Well, my then husband at the time, he tripped, he fell onto concrete, broke his jaw into separate places, shattered his teeth, everything. His jaw was just a mess. And we had to somehow figure out how to get him treatment and get him out of Cambodia and back home to Taiwan. And it was just a nightmare. And I had no insurance. So you think, oh, insurance is so expensive. Not compared to paying out of pocket.
100%. I actually have a very good relationship with my insurance company because I'm upfront with them. Yes. You know, like I tell them what's going on and I share with them my medical information. They request it, but I try not to get stressed about it, because sometimes I think people get very stressed. Oh my God, the insurance company's on my back. They want to know all the stuff. And it's like, just share it with them. They're giving you money. Yeah. You know, you just need to know what your capacity is. And they want to see that you're trying to get better. Most people want to get better, right? It's just the added stress of dealing with it can make the symptoms worse or can make people feel worse. So what I love about mediation, if everyone can just sit down at a table and via mediators who somebody's on your side, you're just having this conversation. Let's take the stress part out of it and realize that there are some things that we can talk about and acknowledge that are going to make this process easier.
Yes. And that's where I also see the stress when it gets into elder care and estates and wills planning, because there's a lot of people who don't even realize, like people I know who are in their 30s and have just bought a house and have a kid and they don't have will. And I tell them the story of when I was living overseas, there was this guy through a friend of mine who had just moved there. He was another expat, and we had welcomed him. We had dinner with him. We were hanging out. And he just established there. He just got a job, and he was staying with our friend. And then our friend calls us up one day, and he goes, "Guess what happened?" We're like, "What?" Well, he wasn't showing up to work, and the boss was calling our friend. And he thought, "That's really weird. I'm just going to go in and check on him." And he opens the door, and he's dead.
Oh, geez.
At 28. Turns out he had diabetes, and he had run out of his insulin and didn't go and change it. So he went into diabetic shock, diabetic coma, died in his sleep. And we were suddenly tasked with figuring out how to get his remains back home to his mother, who didn't have a job at the time. So she was indigent and didn't have the ability to pay the crazy amount and go through the legalities of transporting human remains through international means. And it really woke me up to, oh my gosh, at the time I was 28. And I thought, I haven't done anything about this. If I were to die tomorrow, there's nothing that I'm leaving my family high and dry. And I think what I've learned right now in helping people self-file and prepare their wills and start to have those difficult conversations through mediation about, here's our care plan as we age. Here are the things that we want to do. Here's how we want to divide the estate. Here are the things that we want to watch for when incapacity shows up, because that's a lot of people, and they think wills equals death. And it's like, that's not the bigger issue. The bigger issue is the living will, and they don't even know what a living will is. And they don't even know that it would be helpful. Because some of the things that I've said, there's certain care plans, part of it, that I said, you know what? Please send this to your family doctor. Really? Why do they need it? I said, well, they don't necessarily know if you have a designated power of attorney. And so if you're just telling them and they have it in their records, they'll know that you've planned on your son or your daughter or your neighbor or somebody, and they're going to be that point of contact for all of your medical decisions. Yeah. Oh, that's a good idea.
It's such an important conversation to have, because we don't think about these things, and yet without them, like, you don't know that the government may take over your, or whatever, the government, or the, you know what I'm talking about, the person whose name, they'll take over your bank account, and because now you're not there, so somebody is going to be in charge of that. And then everything's going to have to go through them. And that's a big pain, right? Like, it's a lot when your family is already grieving to also have to deal with these other, it's already enough with the will, but without the will, it's even worse. There's so many other things that you have to deal with if you don't allow your family if you don't have something prepared for worst case scenarios, because your family's going to be pulled into it. And that's very difficult for them at that time when they already have emotional stuff that they're going to be going through.
Yeah, and when I have, even through friends and random people that I know, and I have these conversations, because I'm quite open about it, because I already, even before I met my current husband, and one of our arguments were also about how our medical decision-making is going to happen. So one of my very close friends is actually my medical power of attorney, because I learned very quickly my husband is not going to be very good at medical decisions. So it's like, just so you know, sweetheart, Kia is my medical POA. He's like, oh, but I'm your husband. I'm like, I understand, but you're not going to be able to handle some of the things that I need done. And she's a nurse, and she understands my wishes, and she understands things that need to be done. So I've had those difficult conversations, and I talk to people about this, and they go, well, my mom's going to do it. Well, have you told her? Have you let her know? Is she going to be around when these capacity issues rear their ugly head? Yeah. Really? Are you sure? I mean, I guess some people think that their mother's going to be alive forever, but that's just not really the case.
For sure. And then sometimes it goes to the oldest child, right? Like, and so is your child also going to be the person who at that time wants to be making these really hard adult decisions, and they may already be an adult, but depending on the age, right? Like if your children are still young, or even if they're teenagers or early adults, do you want them at that time to have to deal with these issues when it could go to a sister or a cousin, an aunt, or somebody that you know who would have the capacity, and you can have a conversation with in terms of what your wishes are without them getting emotionally
involved.
Upset. You know, it's a lot for a kid to take on. You know what I'm trying to say? Yeah.
It's very
and eventually the child, the child may be able to as they get older, but it might be hard initially. I know a friend of mine that happened to, he was in third year university, and his father was a little bit older and had a stroke. And then how that, he just wasn't ready for being pulled in to do all this stuff. He had to leave his classes. He had to, there's so many things, because he was the next of kin. He was the one that was named. It's a huge
responsibility. Exactly. And that's such a good point, because I had a neighbor who ended up having very severe mental health issues, and her daughter was 16, and she was the next of kin. And they had to suddenly have her make medical decisions for her mother, and she's a teenager. It's so hard. And having these hard conversations, I've even said, you know what? If you're not sure and you're uncomfortable talking to a legal practitioner, talk to your doctor. And what would you want to be saying to patients?
What would I say to patients, or what I do say to patients? What I do say, and we used to be able to do physical exams. They kind of delisted that, but it was always around, do you have your will set up? Do you have a power of attorney? And when I take them on to my practice, I've always asked that, especially if they were a parent, even if they weren't a parent, but then eventually they became a parent. It was just something, now's the time to start thinking of your own life insurance, who your power of attorney is going to be. Because for somebody who's elderly or even 40 above, whatever, it's a natural conversation to have. But for someone in their 20s and 30s, I might not always have it, although it's really important, especially if they have a serious illness, just to talk about, and just things to think about. Not, we don't have to. Obviously, my role is around the medical, but I need to know who the next of kin is. I need to know who the power of attorney is. And usually that's on the intake form that they have to fill out, that we have somebody to contact. And of course,
love that you do that. Honestly, that's very rare. You're very special. This is great.
I think with the electronic medical records, it will have it. And I don't know if it triggers with age, whether they ask everyone, but usually we have who's the next of kin. Now, here's the other thing. Doctors cannot release information to just anybody. We need to have a signed legal document saying, this person, I've given permission that you can release my information to. This is going to be the power of attorney. You can release information to them. And even with the power of attorney, there may be a medical power of attorney and a financial power of attorney. So there may be two different people doing different roles. So it's really important to have that written down so that we know. And maybe it is rare, but I know it's something I was taught as a medical student, and it's something that I did for my parents. Got their own power of attorney, but when their doctor retired and they moved on to a new doctor, I made sure that paperwork was sent to him, even though they were younger at the time, but just to say, at some point, this is going to be useful. At least it's in the chart. And at one point we did have to go, recently my parents are in their 80s. We did have to go back to that. And before, the family doctor, before he would release anything, he's a colleague of mine. He's like, wait a second, I just got to check. Okay, I've got a release signed that I can, have this conversation with you, or I have the POA that I can have this conversation with you, because otherwise they can't even have a conversation with you around what is happening with your parent or your spouse about what's going on if they don't have that release signed.
And I love that you said that, because there have been people who, when I was even in healthcare, and they're coming for the massage and they're upset because they're dealing with their incapacitated parent, or sometimes they've been named and they're just a relative or even a friend. I even knew people who were neighbors and were named as POAs. And suddenly they're contending with all of this stressful information. But even though they were named in some documents, they weren't necessarily named in medical decision with certain practitioners. So they're constantly going, and they have to take this one document over here, and then they have to walk, and they're coming in and they're so stressed, and their shoulders are up to their ears, and they're just, that verbal, just they're, oh my gosh, and then this happened, and they just need to unload it, because it's just been so much work because it wasn't organized in advance. And that's all it is sometimes just letting those people know, right?
And have a copy of the paperwork. They should, if they're named it, they should have a copy of the paperwork as well, because it'll say what they are able to do and what they're not able to do. And it'll make it so much more clear. Like, I know in my own family situation, we have a power of attorney, and it was very clear around when I could exercise my right of power of attorney above them. And the bank read it and said, well, we can't actually allow you to make this decision at this time because of this clause that's in your mother's POA. That means, that you can't do this at this time, which is fine. It's absolutely fine. It's just, I didn't know that. And it added another level of, oh, now we got to go talk to so-and-so to get this paperwork and whatever. Exactly. And it's one more step. It makes it very difficult, because you're like, oh my God, I thought we had this, but no. Okay. And it's fine. I respect my mother's wishes, my parents' wishes. you have to know what's in the document. You have to have it and recognize it doesn't give you free for all for taking control over everything. It just lists out whoever the person, when they're doing their power of attorney, they will list out what their rules are. And when those things are met, only then can the doctor, the nurse, the lawyer, or the banker, allow that power of attorney to do the things that they need to do.
I love that you brought that up.
There to protect.
Yes, it's so important because a lot of people misunderstand how, especially those medical decisions and, medical power of attorneys are set up, even financial. They don't understand that you can have it very general, very open, very easy to interpret and blanket for potential free-for-all. But you also could be very specific. And it's not about, because this one client I had recently brought up, well, I just want to make sure that they don't feel I'm trying to control everything. And I said, well, it's your life. It's not about control. It's about making sure that you're empowered to make decisions for yourself for as long as possible until you can't anymore. So you get to determine what that looks like. It's just a recipe. It was the best way I could describe it at the time. It's just a recipe of when you put certain ingredients in to bake it. And they're like, oh, okay.
And actually that gives the person the control. The person who's writing up their power of attorney, they get to retain their control for as long as they have the capacity. And that can be written into the document. When this happens, this should happen, this should happen. And then the other person can make decisions, so that it's very clear around when the decision is going to be made, how it's going to be made, and that it's made the way you would want it to be made for yourself, because you've written that out in a legal document.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. I feel we could talk all afternoon, but we are running out of time. And maybe
we can carry the conversation on another time.
If you're interested in coming back, we would love to have you back. You're amazing. I love everything that you post, and I know you're amazing. You're one of my favorite people. You should know that.
Thank you. Well, I love all the things that you have done in your life, from when I've met you, from what you told me about your past, and to where your journey has taken you, because you use everything, and I think people don't, like, some people are like, this is what I do, and they identify with it, and that's the way it's going to be. But you're someone who's just so curious, and you're always innovating what it is you're doing, and then getting new skills around that. I just find it so interesting, that I feel very blessed to watch your journey, that I've been able to watch the time that I've known you. I'm like, wow, what is she doing now? Oh, wow. Like, you're very much an advocate for the people and you're always working to make things better. And I feel blessed to have met you as well. And I think that is, we all vibrate on the same plane when we talk about these issues, and just having the passion for it and working towards sharing these ideas and getting this information out there. I'm very blessed that you guys put your time and effort into this, right? Because this isn't paid work. This is stuff that we do because we're passionate about it. And I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for your time and your effort getting this message out.
And Dr. Vaidya, how can people get in touch with you? How can people connect with you?
Yeah, so I post on the good old Facebook. Love it or hate it, I'm there under the Dr. Shailla Vaidya, the Yoga MD. I think it's just facebook.com/the Yoga MD. On Instagram, I post at theyogamd.ca, and that .ca is for .Canada, and that's because that's where I am. And my website is also www.theyogamd.ca. And on that website, you can get access to the burnout courses for caregivers and for teachers and helping professionals in general, doctors, nurses. I've had reverends and priests and rabbis come through that program. So that's wonderful. We focus a lot on compassion and also what happens when we are giving care and how we can burn out from that. And then on a separate website, I have the Reconnect Concussion Program. And that is more for people who are dealing with brain injury, to get the information out there, because we know access to clinicians is so hard right now. Everywhere around the world post-COVID, we have like a huge shortage of clinicians because we just haven't taken care of them, and they're burning out. And It's just so much need. So it's not medical advice. It's education to help people understand what happened to them in the brain injury and what they can do to help themselves get better. Now, I know if you're brain injured, it's hard to read or listen, but this is where if you have a friend or a family member who can take that information in, that's available for them also to learn about what happened to your brain so they can understand how to best help you, because that's what we want. And sadly, the stress can throw us off in brain injury. We can get very frustrated and our emotions change or can become more heightened, and that can affect our relationships. So if we can all, like people and their people they have around them, if we can all understand what's happening, then we can all work together to get better. And so that's really the goal of the Reconnect Concussion Program. And it can be found at reconnectconcussion.com. It's also on Instagram. I haven't posted as much just yet, as I am still recovering from my own brain injury, but as a lot is on there. We're just getting the YouTube channel up and it's on Instagram. So you can read a few things as well.
Perfect. So please reach out. Dr. Vaidya is an amazing resource, lots of great information. And if you have any other questions, even if you want us to pass on a question, just feel free to email us at toughcallmediation@gmail.com. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We really appreciate you, your feedback, your comments. And don't forget to like, rate, and subscribe. Thanks so much. Bye-bye now.
Thank you for listening to Tough Call Mediation. This podcast is sponsored by Herb Legal LLP. Original music by Tyree Lawton. Marketing by Jasveer Badi of Herb Legal LLP. Assistant marketing by Hope Ursek. Connect to our website, herblostservices.com. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.